We've always been willing to go out on a limb and try things. I've also said repeatedly that form follows function. You know, someone may want something that's aesthetically pleasing to look at, but I've got to find the justification in that form so that it makes sense. My name is James Bleakley, and we're here at my shop in Fort Collins. This is Black Sheep Bikes. I founded the shop in 1999, and I've been building bikes for about 30 years now. This is our truss fork. This one's a 15 by 100, and it's also a tapered steer. In this case, you basically push the steer through from the underside. Once it's been put on the bike, there's a collar that you put up here that fits the underside of the headset cup. You start the steer, insert this on the bike. When you get up to about here, you put the top cap on, and then you get this just kind of started. And then as you press the steer in place, you tension it on the bike. Putting your stem on, tightening your star nut to draw the steer all the way in. Then you tighten the bottom 2 bolts. Make sure your fork is tight. And then you tighten the top collar on the fork, and then you tighten the stem. So I got a job working at Boulder Bikes in 1991. That's really where I first started building bikes. I graduated here in Fort Collins from CSU with a degree in construction management. When I started there, it was in shipping and receiving. So just taking finished bikes, putting them in boxes, filling out the UPS manifest, and getting things out the door. And then it was looking at material ordering and doing kind of the quantity survey to figure out, you know, how do we pair seat stays and chain stays to front triangle builds. And I worked my way from shipping and receiving into assembly, and then over into the machining area, and then eventually back into the weld department. And when I started playing around with welding, that's when it really all kind of clicked for me. That's when I was like, wow, this is amazing, and this is something that I really can connect with doing. The one thing I think I really lacked was a sense of feeling like I had a sustainable career that would get me somewhere outside of the bike industry. And that's when I started working for a company called Advanced Alloys. And that was a company that made fine tolerance weldments. Initially, it was nothing that wouldn't fit in the palm of your hand. So these things were aftermarket parts for medical and helicopter and food and cryogenic companies. And that's where I kind of learned to hone my skill set in terms of fabricating things to a print to very specific tolerances with zero waste. Well, so I was working at Boulder Bikes, and it must have been 1994, and we were out at Big Bear in California. We had a handful of racers who were out there racing, and we're working out of a beat-up E150 Ford Econoline van, and we're in the pit area next to the Ringley van and the Yeti van, which are, you know, painted to the nines and looking very professional. And one of our racers rolled up and kind of looked around and said, wow, we really are the black sheep here. And that was fully 5 years before I started Black Sheep, but that's when the light bulb went off, and I thought, oh wow, what a great name for a company. So fast forward to 99, when I was working at Advanced Alloys, and my son was born, and I'm commuting, you know, 60 miles each way, morning and night, and realizing that it's dark when I leave and it's dark when I get home, and I'm not going to have an opportunity to see this young human grow up if I don't make a change. So what I had to do to keep busy initially was contract welding, most of it in the bike industry, but I would say at that point really only 10% of what I was doing was actually building Black Sheep bikes. I was welding tandems for a company in Denver called Da Vinci Designs, and I was also welding a lot of titanium for a frame builder in Boulder called Dean. Been in this space for about 10 years. The part for me that really is important is finding a balance between work and play, and being with family and riding my bike. And that was something that I lost when either working too hard building or managing other people. When I'm welding tie, I've got an internal purge. So this hose in the steerer is actually running argon through the fork steer. The vent holes in the steerer purge the blades. And then what I'll do is I'll do the root pass on the dropouts, but still leave a little opening so that argon can still flow through the fork, through the entire kind of weld process. And then I'll close up those little holes towards the end once I've got the disc tab on and I'm kind of in the, the last little bit of welding. People often ask me if titanium is hard to weld, and my answer is pretty much the same every time. It's not really hard to weld, it's just a process that needs to be done a very specific way. In the case of aluminum or steel welding, oftentimes you can adapt your weld style to suit the metal. But in the case of titanium, you really need to weld it how it wants to be welded. So that speaks to the purge internally, kind of being in an area that's still or calm so you don't have a lot of moving air around you. And then that kind of root and cap process that I was talking about. Those are all really good things to prevent oxygen from being on the weld, which is ultimately, I would say probably the biggest risk in welding titanium is that you have the thing contaminated with oxygen. And the reason that's so crucial with tie is that the metal has 20% elongation to yield. So in other words, to bend tie until the point where it bends and stays, you've got to exceed that 20% threshold. That number in steel is 11%, and people say steel has a lively feel compared to aluminum. Aluminum is 4%. So that elongation is part of what gives tie the kind of spring and shock absorption that the material is known for. This is a tie fork built for a 36er. You can probably see massive offset in the rake on this fork. In order to get trail somewhere in the neighborhood of what would be called medium to low trail, it takes about 108 mils of offset here to get roughly 65 millimeters of trail. And so as silly as this thing looks, it actually provides a couple of benefits to the 36er. The first of which is the low trail makes it a lot easier to actually initiate turns with a wheel that has so much weight, and the centrifugal force is making the wheel really hard to turn. So the low trail aspect of it makes it a little easier to turn. This is kind of like when you started riding clipless pedals and you realized, oh, I need to start thinking about getting out of my pedals a little sooner. On the 36er, you still need to think about initiating your turn a little sooner. It turns out another one of the benefits of that offset, though, is that it helps eliminate toe overlap as well. So that 108 mils of offset on the fork, when it's paired with a 67 or 68 degree head angle, means you don't have to deal with toe overlap. So like I say, what I'll do for TIG typically is a 2-pass process. Sometimes it's basically root and cap, let's call it. And the root is the first pass and the cap is the second. Root is oftentimes done just fusion, which I think is a good way to tie things together on the parent level. You're better served doing both the root and the cap with some fill, just to make sure that the weld isn't the thinnest section, you know, in the union between the two. In a circumstance like this, you know, the rear blade's trying to tuck under, but the front's trying to pull forward, and you get much less load at the crown. So you've got a fork that feels like it can still be supple without that hard shuttering and without the worry of fatigue. You know, on the fat bike, with that Desplosion fork and the longer kind of mountain mustache bar, when you're all the way out on those hooks and you're really reefing on it, I would say it wouldn't be uncommon to get an inch or two of travel. You know, and it always goes right back to where it was before. So the thing that people find incredible is that I could ride some of these bigger, rougher mountain rides on a so-called rigid bike but the titanium is a system that really isn't that rigid. And if you design it right, you can make the rigidity work for you at the pedals, but still have a good amount of comfort for the hands and the rest of the body. I like the idea of passive suspension and non-moving parts, and I think part of it is just because I'm looking for a solution outside of the box, and part of it is I'm just really lazy about wanting to do maintenance. And then there was a time where I just, I was looking for more travel than I could get out of a regular unicrown fork. Before there were fat bike forks, I built a fork that I call the 8-bit, which is this beast right here, right? You've got basically what amounts to a truss on the front end, mounts to this articulating aluminum linkage. And so I had the vibration damping in the truss, but I also had 100 mils of travel in the linkage assembly, all in a 6-pound package, which was about a pound more than the frame was, or a pound and a half. So ultimately, to spend that much weight and money and complexity on a system for a fork that I would need, I'd really want the travel for 1 or 2 minutes in a 3-hour ride, ultimately wasn't worth the time or money put into it. 2004 or 2005 when I signed up for my first race single speed that was an ultra, and it was the Firecracker 50 in Breckenridge. And I showed up the day before and went to the race check-in where I got my bag of goodies and my race plate. And at that point, someone said, what category are you racing? And I said single speed. And they said, are you riding with another person? Are you a team or are you solo? And I said solo. And it kind of took their breath away. And then they took out a Sharpie and they put a big SS on my calf. And I thought, wow, I don't know what I've gotten myself into, but it seems like I've bitten off a lot. And I think it was probably 2 years after that I did my first Leadville Trail 100. And again, after doing it on a single speed, the question really wasn't for me, can I do it again geared, was, can I improve my time on a single speed? And let's see, initially, I think the first 6 times I did it were on rigid 29er. And then I kind of transitioned to fat bikes. And like I said, I had my fastest time on my single speed fat bike probably in 2013 or 2014. And then I thought, well, what else can I do? And I started riding a clunker, which is like a single speed on steroids. It is only a single speed, but as I was riding it, it was no front brake and coaster brake only. And so the way single speeding kind of opened my eyes to carrying momentum downhill, so you didn't have to use it going or lose so much energy going uphill. The clunker taught me about how much I rely on a front brake and how much I front brake when I don't really need to, and how good front end traction is if you're not hitting the brake. The coaster brake on a clunker is really kind of on off. And what I realized on the clunker is that sometimes it's better not to hit the brake because you lose traction and just kind of roll it with speed. Had moments of just absolute terror. You're not looking at the turn ahead, you're looking at the turn ahead of the turn ahead because you're going to come through something and have to set up for something else. So you really develop an eye gaze to look further ahead on the trail. You really want to force the outside foot down as you're pedaling into a corner. And there are times when you have to commit to a half stroke of the pedal to get your foot down because you can't freewheel it and you're still pointed downhill and going around a switchback. So there is that kind of oh shit moment of really having to commit and force that pedal stroke so that you can get that outside foot down and then jam the brake on for a little bit and then repeat. And it's not about being the fastest. It's about challenging myself and having the biggest smile. And that seems to happen on the single speed more than anything else. And then we come to what is kind of our current one-piece bar stem combo. And actually, we've got this thing that's got a much tighter radius. This is 128 millimeters of drop. But really the only way to get this thing with less reach and narrower is to have a welded union where the drop meets the flat. And that's simply because in order to bend a curve and then rotate to a curve in a different plane, we need almost a 2-inch straight. So you can see a 2-inch straight here and a 2-inch straight here, which was necessary in order to reorient the piece in the bender and restrain it. In this case, this bar is actually cut here, but there is a piece welded in here, and it really does a handful of things. These little bits here we make on the lathe, and this plugs into the flat part of the bar in this case, and then the hook plugs onto this end, and that hook lets us set flare and sweep so that we can basically make symmetrical changes on one side of the center line match the other side. And so it was an easy solution for this. While I call this the one-piece bar stem, the other name is the 9-piece one-piece bar stem, because there are 9 separate pieces that go into making one of these setups.